Alastor has plenty of things that he's trying to hide, but his smile ain't one of them. The saying, "you're never fully dressed without a smile," perfectly suits him, because it automatically implies that he has quite a few things that he'd like to cover up. For instance, if we take a closer look at his human days, we can get a better understanding of the painful truth behind that ever-present smile. Regardless of his natural talents and charms, a sense of insecurity always followed him, just like his shadow. No matter how hard he tried to prove his worth, others would unfairly look down upon him due to things that were outside of his control, like the color of his skin. Unfortunately, racial prejudice was still deeply entrenched in the culture of the 1930s, and the showbiz industry was no different in that regard. I mean, just look at how skeptical the producers were during his audition for a radio show. They judged and scrutinized his every move, but he never slipped up and eventually won their approval, with one charming smile at a time. For a quick contrast, take a look at the visible support and enthusiasm that Vincent received from his producers. It's quite a stark difference, to say the least. With that in mind, I think it's a bit easier to understand why Alastor is so enamored with radio as the proper medium to express himself. Despite his handsome looks, he felt too insecure to pursue a career in acting where he'd be on full display for all to see. He hid behind a radio persona and let his voice be the star of the show instead, since it protected him from the judgmental eyes of the public. It seems that even in his afterlife, he never really managed to let go of those self-doubts. This is why, when he says his face was made for radio, he truly believes it. This idea only gets further reinforced by the fact that his figure can't ever be properly caught on camera. It ultimately all ties back into the insecurities that came from his human life. The fact that he lacked the power to control the unfair ways in which he was perceived by others eventually drove Alastor to madness. He felt wronged by the unjust world that he was stuck in, so he found a tragic sense of comfort in seeking an afterlife where he would be the only one who's truly in charge of his own destiny. But until he could reach that point, he channeled that anger and his pent-up frustrations into a sinister game where he would be the one to pass judgment onto others by taking total control over their very lives. When he was finally able to reach the other side, he fell right into Rosie's trap, since she could immediately see through Alastor's cocky facade. On the surface, he tried to present himself as someone who mockingly laughed in the face of death, but the reality was the exact opposite. He knew the consequences of his atrocities would catch up to him sooner or later, so he feared the eternal punishment that awaited him with his inevitable demise. As much as Alastor wanted to consider himself a predator who hunts for the thrill, the moment he contacted Rosie, it was game over for him and he became nothing more than her prey. Even his death marks the fact that the hunter eventually became the hunted. She tempted him with an irresistible deal where he would become the strongest sinner in hell. He had no way of understanding what that truly meant, but Rosie knew Alastor would be blinded by his desperation to finally gain the upper hand. In theory, he got what he wanted, but at what cost? He finally obtained all the power that he so desperately craved, but it made him completely powerless over his own fate. To add insult to injury, there's also a twisted irony behind his demonic form as a deer. It's an eternal reminder that he'll never be quite on top of hell's food chain. Not only did Alastor fail to cheat death itself, but he also lost all the freedoms that came with being alive. Sure, he was the strongest sinner, but at the end of the day, he didn't feel like that much of a winner. He had no choice but to keep a smile on his face for protection. After all, the way in which others perceived him was the one thing that he still had control over. The faker the smile, the greater the insecurity, I suppose. It's even implied that he may have stitched his own face in order to prevent his mask from ever fading away. Even with that in mind, he can't seem to ever shake off those resurfacing insecurities, especially when anyone humbles him or dares to question his authority in hell. From my point of view, this inescapable truth about himself is quite cleverly represented by his shadow form. Whenever things get rough, at the very least, he can always trust his own shadow to be there for him and keep him safe. And when it comes to trusting others, that's a mistake that he'll never make ever again. The moment he trusted someone from hell, he got eternally punished for it. This is why Alastor believes there are no friends in hell. Since he had no choice but to learn that lesson the hard way, he makes sure to use it to his advantage whenever he can. Just like Rosie, he prefers to strike deals that give him the upper hand in the long run. Now, if there's something that Alastor hates more than anything else in the world, it's him being dismissed and looked down on by others, which is why Lucifer drives him crazy. Alastor's massive sense of pride feels instantly threatened whenever he's around the sin of pride in the flesh. He hates the fact that Rosie and Lucifer constantly remind him of his own limitations, which further feeds into his insecurities that he'll never be powerful enough to escape from his chains. Although that never really stopped him from tormenting other overlords who were beneath him, especially the ones who failed to acknowledge his strength. Which raises the question, what about Husk? We know for a fact that they have a deal in place where Al owns his soul, but Husk was allowed to keep his powers anyway. Why was he ultimately spared while others had their souls torn into pieces? It's because Husk somewhat parallels his own situation. Both of them gambled their own souls away due to their easily exploitable weaknesses. As sinners, Alastor and Husk have visible animal features, but neither of them seem to be all that thrilled when others point out those aspects about themselves. Whether intentional or not, Alastor more or less ended up mirroring the twisted owner-pet dynamic that he's got with Rosie, except this time, Husk is the victim. He continues that toxic cycle by taking out his frustrations on Husk, effectively mistreating him as nothing more than his own pet. Another potentially subconscious habit of Alastor's is the way in which he repeatedly allows himself to be caged into environments where he starts at the bottom with the eventual goal of clawing himself to the top, even if all the odds are heavily stacked against him. It's possible that he finds a weird sense of comfort whenever he's trapped in those kinds of situations, since he's had to deal with such struggles throughout his entire existence. Whether human or demon, he's always enjoyed the thrill of toppling over his fellow overlords. Although when Al tried to do the same with Vox, it completely backfired on him as he almost lost his life in the process. For that one brief moment when he was reminded of his own mortality, we also got to see a glimpse of his former humanity, fearfully peeking through his smile. Alastor is undeniably a man of many faces, but we'll never truly get to see them as long as the mask stays on. Even with his newfound sense of freedom, it's hard to say if he'll ever escape his biggest insecurities. But one thing's for sure though, no matter what, he'll never let go of that smile.